You pitched an idea at me, and I think it's a really great idea to talk about. You said, I was watching your live stream about your father. It reminded me of three things. A, the movie Forrest Gump and how he holds the heroic high ground. B, Jordan Peterson's thing about how men of lower IQ have almost no role in our culture and economy. C, PVK's replaying of the conversation about how simple Christians often are more effective than the deep thinkers.
Yeah.
What can you expand on that?
Yeah.
Where would we start on this conversation?
Going back and reading it now, I'm thinking I think I may have had some informed by envy to some degree. A lot of the people in the corner are very philosophically minded and much more well educated, well informed than I am, and so I sometimes find it a little bit intimidating. But also, I think it's a real thing, though. This is kind of one of the things that I'm watching in my later years is especially this PVK about how simple Christians are more effective, and how does that happen? But I do think there's been change to the roles or expectations put on men during our lifetimes. I was born in the early 60s, 61, and I was watching some home movies last night, which I dug out. I'm not sure why, but not for this occasion, but I dug them out and I was watching them. And things have changed a lot since 1961. And I think the expectations, well, also where I'm at is different too, in as far as geography. So the expectations in our general culture have changed, and in the public culture, you might say the kind of the coastal culture that sets the pace of the United States. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been challenging over our lifetimes. At least it seems like that to me. You had talked about, I don't want to, feel free to jump in and poke me if I talk too much.
No, please. You're fine. You're doing great.
You had talked about your dad, like serving in the Korean War. My grandfathers had a role in World War II, but my father and my uncles were just kind of in between. I had my youngest uncle was in the National Guard a little bit around the Vietnam War time, so I didn't have any that actively served. The National Guard at that time, I don't think got called up at all. The modern National Guard, they're kind of a revolving door. They're going all the time, but it wasn't like that until recently, so that was one of the ways you could serve and be less likely to be sent out of the country was to be in the National Guard. And I've never talked to him about him, and he's gone now, so I don't know if that was a plan on his part or exactly what. But
yeah, we didn't start it in my memory. We did not start deploying National Guard abroad until the second war in Iraq. Maybe the first one, but maybe, that was very
I don't
quick,
remember.
And it probably would have been. It didn't stick out in my mind. These poor guys signed up for 30 days a year and weekends or something, and ended up in Iraq for a full tour.
Yeah,
that's rough.
Yeah,
but it was the change in the military, probably from in the days of World War II and Vietnam. It was all draft. That was the bulk of the army in those days.
Yeah, that was from draft to volunteer, and I think that was one of the things they changed along with that change. So I didn't really have a military family. My parents didn't serve in the military.
Well, I didn't. Like that. Yeah, my dad was. He was definitely when I wanted to join. I was 19. The Marine Corps barracks in Beirut got bombed, and I had something I'd been on my mind for a long, long time, all my whole life wanting to be a soldier. Growing up on Audie Murphy movies and working for a Green Beret, a veteran, a former Green Beret, as a teenager. So I had these images of in my head of I wanted to serve. And so at 19, I decided I was going to serve. Everybody in my life was arguing with me about it, because the shift had occurred in a sense. My dad didn't want me to go because I'm going to throw away my life, was his attitude. He didn't have a great experience in the military, but he served. He did his duty. And I felt like that's what I wanted to do. But circumstances prevented it, and I'd had an eye surgery that made it. They considered that experimental, so I signed up, and they gave me a medical discharge like 2 weeks before boot camp. So I was discharged before I got to serve. But when you're talking about men of intellect, I was while in preceding all this, I had become poetry editor on the literary magazine, the college I was at, and I was a aspiring man of the intellect, but at the same time, I had this other half of me desperately wanting to be a man of action, and feeling guilty that I couldn't be, and I think I felt some of that guilt because of like I said, the missed opportunity to serve. I know my uncle fell in, but he was medically unqualified. My oldest uncle was medically unqualified to serve, or disqualified, and it ate him up for a long time. Because of all of the brothers, he was the one who was kind of made for it. He would have thrived in the military. His two younger brothers, still older than my dad, they did serve. And I felt some of that. It was just like, I think our generation had us being pulled both ways, right? You had the Vietnam example, both the guys who went. Well, the generation itself was divided, right? You had the guys who served and the guys who went to college and protested and didn't and draft
or went to Canada. Yeah.
And we had the media was giving us heroes on both ends. As I said, I grew up with Audie Murphy movies. People who don't know who Audie Murphy is, you can Google him. Most decorated soldier in World War II became a movie star. After the war.
Reenacting some of his heroics. Didn't he get he got a Medal of Honor, I think.
Oh, yeah. Right. He did. He did indeed. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a subject to pursue too, living through transitional times, which might be helpful for our young people.
I thought, I had mentioned this movie, Forrest Gump. Well, Forrest Gump in the movie is not a very bright guy, and he knows he's not a very bright guy, but he's like exceptionally honest and maybe exceptionally lucky or something like that. But one of the scenes, of course, he wins the Medal of Honor too, but fictionally. And one of the scenes is him beating up the protester boyfriend of his childhood girl, and the boyfriend is an intellectual protester type of guy, and that's, I don't know, to me that's like 1967, 1968, like in a nutshell. For some reason, to me they wrapped it up just about right, that it was so conflicted. And we had people wearing hard hats and counter protest against people that were protesting the war, and it was just everybody was protesting something. Do you when you look back, do you remember, watching the evening news and seeing video from Vietnam and video of tear gas flying and all that? Because I don't like dream about it, but I remember some of that kind of stuff, and I didn't like it. It wasn't a good environment, just in general.
Yeah, it was what I think anything that would qualify as a memory has been replayed as in more documentary style after the fact.
That would be true.
A lot of the material showed up in succeeding news reports and then documentaries. So it's hard. Some of that gets conflated. What I do remember, though, I vividly remember my parents having the TV on during the Watergate hearings, and
Yeah.
the feeling of instability, that little bit of anxiety. In those days, TV got interrupted often with breaking news, and it was real breaking news back then.
Right.
It's every day it's breaking something on CNN or
Oh yeah,
one
that
of these
went on
others.
and on and on.
But
Yeah.
now they would interrupt regular programming for some event, and terrorist attack, major protests, any number of things, right? Earthquakes, everything.
Right.
But that's what they did. You would be watching.
But you'd
Just
be
say it
watching Bewitched or something, and it would
exactly.
jump right in, or Peyton Place, or some regular show. It wasn't a 24/7 news program, and then they had to dream up something to show you. It was you were watching Beverly Hillbillies, and all of a sudden it was, oh, we got to tell you this other thing.
And it was jarring. I mean,
Yeah.
so you stood up and you paid attention, right? You alert. We were on alert. You just leaned
Yeah.
forward. It wasn't noise, but that made it very emotionally impactful. So
Right.
probably the last time, and this broke into the cable news section, but the last time I guess I felt that level of shock would have been the attack on the Twin Towers that brought them down, 9/11.
Yeah, and by that time we did have CNN, I think, and
Yeah, it was
other
all 24. It was already 24/7.
The first one or the most recent one I remember before the 24/7 stuff would probably been the first shuttle explosion, something like that. Um, I remember. I think that interrupted regular programming. I don't think CNN existed then, but maybe so. I don't know. I don't know my broadcast history as well as I should.
No,
But
it's
yeah,
just we just experienced it. I don't know if it's. I don't know if you have to. There's a lot of. I'm sure there's history there, but we did experience it. We were old
yeah,
enough to grow up with it, and know
yeah,
it was. It's more of a feeling than it is a memory in some ways.
yeah, yeah. And I expect you're the same. And I was not old enough to do any of the duck and cover kind of stuff. But by the time I was in elementary school, I don't remember doing any of the Cold War, deep Cold War, Cuban Missile Crisis kind of
No,
response
yeah,
stuff. That had already passed. But my people, just a few years older than me, remember that as being very jarring. I remember living in the Midwest. Excuse me. We had tornado drills in school, but we didn't have shooter drills, and we didn't have any bombing drills or anything like that I remember. So there's always something. There's
yeah.
always something they're preparing you for.
This is true, and it's the nature of modern life.
Yeah.
We and there's always this expectation in modern life of that we need to have some policy in place that will make it survivable, make it better, get us through it. And some
Yeah.
things you just can't get through, right? When you
I think
about
that
it.
whole preparedness thing is probably post World War II. I wasn't around in the 30s, but I kind of doubt that they were doing any of that national preparedness kind of stuff before the Roosevelt era. At least I don't think so.
No.
Well, for one thing, they didn't really have the communications system to get things out. And I think all of that was Cold War type response. So I was jogging. This is kind of off our topic. I was jogging with some guys a couple weeks ago, and he was telling about, he's a little bit older than I am, and he was telling about how we went by where he grew up, the house where he grew up, and he said, yeah, and this guy over here, his house has a basement, and my dad and his dad got together and decided to turn it into a bomb shelter. And this guy's probably, I don't know, 4 years older than I am. And so he remembers that attitude, and I don't really remember any much of that. What preceded me a little bit, which I'm glad to miss it.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's okay. I mean, they probably serve a use in hurricanes and stuff if you have
That's true.
good drainage and
Oh yeah, yeah. It's not. it's unusual in Mississippi to have a basement, and so just the neighbor having a basement would have been an interesting thing. But the thing he remembered from his childhood was how they were that was gonna be their bomb shelter. So
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure there are a lot of those things floating around that we don't
yeah,
know about until you go shopping for real
yeah,
estate,
it's it's uh, it's very interesting. Just the we go 20 years at a time for generations or something like that, but that's really not very. It's not small enough either geographically or in time, because my older brother is 4 years older than me, and I'm sure he experienced things much differently than I did, just by that much time.
So your dad came in between. He missed the wars.
Yeah, he
So
graduated from college in I think '57.
okay, so your
So
dad was
he would have been too
considerably
young
younger
for
than mine, though.
Korea,
Okay,
and then too old for Vietnam. So,
okay, yeah,
well, roughly. I mean, if he had been in a military family, he probably could have worked into early Vietnam, but he was doing other things. So,
right. Was probably married by then. Yeah, he would have been because you're
yeah,
born in '62 or something. So you
yeah,
said.
yeah.
Um,
61 for me. Yeah,
so yeah, and they those married men got they had a lot in the Vietnam draft era. A lot of men got deferred
right.
for
Well, that was
reasons
one
like
of the
marriage
complaints.
and
One of the
college.
complaints at the time was that they were only taking. Well, they weren't only, but they were mostly taking
For
people who couldn't figure
minorities.
out a way to get out of it, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
It was very divisive.
Yeah,
Um,
it was a big policy error. I mean, I understood they wanted they wanted men to go to college for engineering and sciences because we were also competing with the Soviets
right,
with the technology race that was on by
right,
then.
right.
Uh, so that was probably their logic, but it boomeranged because in World War II, everybody got. I mean, it was really
Everybody was
hard.
involved. Yeah,
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 you could get out for a medical reason if you were unfit to serve, but if you were physically fit to serve, you pretty much were guaranteed a
yeah.
spot. You're going to put on a
Either,
uniform. Well, you may not end up in the front line.
yeah.
A lot of senators' sons got back row seats, but they did. They still donned
Well, in
the uniform at the
the
basic.
the effort at home also was such that if for some reason you weren't active service, you were going to be involved in something that probably had something, you'd be involved in industry, or you would
Right.
have rationing, or they had all sorts of things that affected your life
Well,
you
even the
couldn't avoid.
stats. Yeah, the stats just on production, automobile production, civilian automobile production,
Didn't
ground
they just
towns
quit?
is
I think they quit during
almost
the war.
zero. I think they
Yeah.
produced the number of cars they produced were in the hundreds over a 5 year period. It was
Yeah.
astonishing. And if I might even be exaggerating the
Well, I'm sure
hundreds,
they probably
but it
produced
was
some just for the government anyway, just to drive
yeah.
around
And those are
Washington,
probably
D.C.
you're right. You're
Yeah.
right. Yeah, it's crazy. But okay, so your dad, would you consider your dad a transitional figure between? Because okay, let's go back up in your email again. Because you compare Cary Grant was kind of the man of wit and
Yeah.
intellect.
Yeah. Well, there's kind of this. Where did I go with that? I wrote another.
Yeah, you wrote a second paragraph I didn't read.
Let me see. Yeah. Okay. The boyfriend, Forrest Clobbers, the intellectual boyfriend. I covered that. And then there's,
You contrasted that with Cary Grant,
yeah, where,
suave.
yeah, there's kind of two sorts of heroes in like the movies. I'm not really a movie follower, but I am interested in like what they offer. And so you see these waves of movie, like all of a sudden you've got zombie movies everywhere, and then you've got superhero movies, and then they kind of come in groups.
Right.
And the romantic movies, you kind of had Robert Mitchum versus Cary Grant. You got the suave, sweet talking kind of very cool customer kind of guy, and Cary Grant or Rock Hudson or somebody like that. And then you've got like Robert Mitchum or John Wayne or
Yeah.
what's his
My
name in
dad's
the
heroes. My dad's hero was a boyhood hero was Gene Autry,
Gene
and
Autry. Yeah.
and which was, I mean, by today's standards, would be completely unrealistic, a singing cowboy. But
Yeah.
but he was the singing
My
cowboy
dad.
who saved the day and saved the
Yeah.
girl.
My dad was similarly. He had early records, 45 records from Gene Autry and
Oh
Roy
yeah.
Rogers and
Oh
the
yeah,
singing
Roy.
cowboy type guys. Yeah.
Yeah, they were a genre, and then in adulthood, a later stage, more mature content would be John Wayne, the
Yeah.
quiet man, the
Yeah.
cowboy, the various types of cowboy figures. They were definitely, they weren't Forrest Gumps, but they were men of few words, and they definitely
You can
men of
kind of
action.
see that. There's a movie, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, has both Jimmy Stewart and John Wayne in it, and Jimmy
Perfect.
Stewart kind of plays a bourgeois shopkeeper kind of guy, and John Wayne is a rough, tough guy, and they play off that kind of dynamic between the two of them in that movie. Which I'm not a movie reviewer, so I can't say much more about it, but that's one of the interesting dynamics anyway that they actually knew about at the time because they were playing it again. And there's a guy who kind of played both sides, and that's Humphrey Bogart, because you got him in playing the suave guy in Casablanca, and then you've got him in what's the one with Katharine Hepburn and the boat?
Yeah, yeah, I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
Anyway,
it's on the tip of my tongue. I'll keep
African
talking. I'll Google
Queen,
it.
the African Queen,
There you go. There you
where he
go.
plays kind of a rough customer, and so he actually plays kind of both sides of the fence. In one he's a suave guy, and the next time he's a rough guy.
Well,
So
and if you look into the private lives of these men, they generally, because they were pampered movie stars, often felt the need, it seems like, to compensate, to try to live up to the action side, the action hero, the action driven dynamic or expectation of what men they projected on the screen, but then
right,
their real life contrasted with that, so they overcompensated often. They were often hard drinking, hard hitting, get themselves into all kinds of trouble privately, uh, or just active individuals. They were Jimmy Stewart, for example. Just he tried in some ways tried to live up to the ideals that he projected often in his private
yeah,
life. He had a long-term marriage and was known for, well, he was a hero. He was himself a war hero,
right,
and served he was a pilot.
yeah. I think even like up into the 50s, if I remember,
He
maybe
did, and then
60s.
yeah, was in the
Yeah,
reserves for a long
yeah,
time. Yeah. Which is and then he didn't talk about it, right? A lot of people, you only found out about his service well after the fact.
right,
It was never something he talked about, or, and they did play it up in propaganda films, those little newsreels they produced during the war. But even then, they didn't reveal a lot. People didn't know that he commanded whole squadrons at the end of the war.
right.
So these days they'd be playing it up. It'd be part of the press release, right?
Right.
It would be a whole media strategy getting that information out about as if a celebrity would do such a thing. It's unimaginable these days. To see a similar. I mean, I'm sure they're out there, and you see a couple. I mean, occasionally you'll hear about the football player
Right. Yeah, I'm
who's
trying to think of the man who was a football NFL star, and then he went to Iraq, and I
yeah
don't remember
and
his
died.
name.
I
Yeah,
mean, yeah,
I think so.
yeah.
So it does happen,
It
but
does happen,
I
but
understand
it's
what you're
rare. It
saying.
seems rare. So back to your dad. Would your dad, in your mind, how does your dad fall in? Let's just treat it like a spectrum and just say, we're making pretend like we could bifurcate human beings this way, but there's a spectrum. and there's the Cary Grant kind of character.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. Would you? Well, we could go to the Forrest Gump example. I assume your dad wasn't a hippie war protester. They were.
No, no. In fact, I can't think of anyone in my extended family who was. Um, my, let me think a minute. Yeah, no, my youngest uncle in National Guard would have been the right age for that, but I don't think he got involved in that as far as I know. Um, well, some of it's also geography because we were in the Midwest. I grew up in central Iowa, and some of what people do is what's the selections available to them,
Right.
And he was the only child and first of his family to go to college, and so he was focused, I think, on that, and then got a job out of college, and actually got married before he had finished college, and so had a family early, and then got a job out of college, and then he ended up working for that place his whole career, and so I think he worked there for I don't know, like 35, maybe 40 years. He retired. I think he was 57, and he had worked there his whole career. So whatever, 22 to 57 would be probably 45 years. He worked for that same place, and they did good. It was important work. He worked in water treatment, municipal water treatment industry, designing and building. And at the time, that was a big thing because a lot of small towns in, Kansas or Nebraska or wherever did not have, they would just be pumping water out of a well and delivering it to their local water customers. And so then they would, the rise of government regulation and scientific knowledge about drinking water was such that then a lot of places then would have to, we need to get a water treatment system. And so it was I think both an honorable and needed thing to be working on. So,
Yeah. Well, and you would be, I would assume, did you grow up in farm country, small city,
no,
medium-sized city?
we were kind of in the suburbs of Des Moines, and so the generation earlier, my mother's parents did have farming up until my elementary school years, and then it got turned into a suburb, turned into houses, and but within my lifetime, they were doing some farming there, and then my dad's parents were mostly city folks. They had some country. They had history in the countryside, but lived when he was growing up. Lived in the town. Lived in Des Moines. So, yeah. So, and none of them were particularly successful. Like wildly successful or property owners or whatever. Well, the farming was probably the biggest going concern of the whole family tree, I would think. So, and I think they did pretty well at farming. I'm not sure. I was too young before it all just kind of disappeared. Within a couple of years, it went from cornfield to houses, and so I didn't get involved with that very much.
My wife grew up in Indiana, and her father was a teacher, public school, high school science teacher, and did it till he retired, 30, 40 years. And she said that the city, they lived in the county seat, but the county seat was maybe a town of 10,000 people, and in a county that had a population maybe twice that total, and very, very agricultural at the time. And you had guys who worked in factories or guys who worked were farmers.
Yeah.
And he always, she said, always felt some sense of shame that he was not one of them, that he wasn't a farmer, especially, that he and that he was a teacher, that he felt lesser than.
Yeah.
Isn't that
Well,
funny?
that has kind of been a wave that has come and gone. I think, the Farm Aid stuff with Willie Nelson having the concerts and all of that. We went through a couple rounds of that in the 80s and 90s, I think. I'm not sure if I have my date ranges right, but
Yeah, small farmers have been struggling for a long
yeah, small
time.
farming is pretty much gone from what I understand. You need to have enough acreage to pay for the big machinery. And you got to buy enough, and the equipment is so expensive to a certain degree, and so it's a
But it's
much
just
bigger operation than it was then. I went to college with people whose parents had 400 acres or something, 200 acres, and now that's not enough to do anything
right.
with. You've got to have thousands of acres.
Which is bizarre when you actually go out and try to walk 200 acres. You'd be astonished how much land that actually is. It
Yeah.
doesn't sound very much in our heads, but go out and try to walk it.
Well, yeah, and then the dollar amounts too. Well, of course, you're in California where
Yeah,
real estate and things are much higher than I have to deal with. But if you're paying ten to $15,000 an acre, and you're going to buy 1,000 acres, yeah, you're talking some money.
you're talking
So
some real money. Yeah,
yes,
even in
yeah,
2024. But it's just back to this transitional thing of expectations. His father and his brother were farmers, but and struggled. But it was just funny to me that you have a successful, educated man who feels like he's lesser
right.
than his peers
Right.
because
I
he's
guess that's
not
what I was
a
thinking and
farmer.
talking
It's
about
so
Farm Aid
strange.
was there's an attachment. Farming is one of these things where there's an attachment to it
Ah,
that's
yeah,
not economic. People would have to sell their farm and they would get so depressed that they just couldn't go on. And and that you saw that in the Depression too, or I've heard about it. I wasn't there, but people that
sure.
would lose their farm, it was just devastating. But I think we're kind of past that, where farming now doesn't have, I mean, it does still have some romance to it, but I think I don't know. My impression is that it's gotten kind of beyond that. If all it was about was romance, you probably couldn't be in it anymore because it's so technically and financially difficult that you wouldn't have the right temperament to be able to keep at it. So
Yeah, the
I don't know.
romance seems to be very much kind of Instagrammable
Yeah,
and built around uh, or really, I don't know, esoteric's wrong, but the or super organic um, production methods that aren't market driven but are
right,
more idealistic or
right,
ideologically driven.
right. And
Uh,
there are people that can like form a niche market, figure out how to do it on a small scale, but it's not easy to do.
well, Sherry, it may be coming back. They certainly Sherry on Grail Country did a live stream with Luke Freeman and a couple other uh, farming folk, and they did a whole show around it. It
Okay.
just came out just a couple days ago. It's worth listening to. So there is they and there. Oh, Michael Martin was on there as well. He's a farmer with 9 kids and a professor, and a poet. He's kind of
He
it's
covers
all
it
wrapped
all.
in one. Yes,
Yeah.
he's a yeah interesting guy. Um, so there, the ideal is still there. The emotional attachment because they spoke very emotionally about it at some level, but also very practical in the sense that you guys have no idea where your meat comes from. You have no idea the relationship you develop with the animals that you ultimately slaughter for food and
Right.
things
Right.
like that. It's so yeah, we're in another transitional period. It's crystal clear at this point. So okay, back to your women in
Okay.
your life when you were growing up, where would you put them on that spectrum?
Oh, on the scale. Well, let's see. Um, that is a good question. My father's father, um, let's say, let's say, uh, manly man of the soil, will give him a 0. And well, that's maybe not the right end of the scale. Anyway, we'll say 0 to 100 toward Cary Grant. How that sounds? So that you're 0, you're nowhere near, and
Sure.
100, you're. But
There we
that's kind
go.
of the way it feels like our culture is tilted also. But I could be wrong, because there's also opposite signs. So let's see, Cary Grant. I'll give him a 60 on the Cary Grant scale. But more, maybe more on the Jimmy Stewart line, where he's more practical and earthy than suave. Um, they didn't do a lot of traveling, or well, no, I shouldn't say that. They did some inside the United States traveling, but not a lot of international traveling. So, um, and my mother's family, since they had the farm, I would say for her, well, about the same, 50 to 60 on the suave scale. She's kind of surprising, because then she did a more traveling. She kind of followed a pattern of living in the same spot she grew up, but then doing some periodic traveling. And then she would try things. She would try things that were kind of unusual for her. Well, at least I thought they were kind of unusual for her family and for her background. So um, not really heavy either way. Not rough. I didn't grow up with a lot of violence or swearing or any of that kind of stuff. Although they don't necessarily have to correlate. You could have someone who's a blacksmith and works with their hands, and that's doesn't swear or punch people. But I don't know. These are complicated. This is complicated. This is getting more
It
complicated as
does.
we get
It
into
really,
it.
yeah, you talk about human beings, it gets more complicated. You
Yeah, it's
can't
getting
ever
more
simplify
complicated
it.
as we get there.
But it does, when I was
But
thinking
they were
about the
both,
man,
yeah,
well, they
they were,
talk about the kind of man your dad was, like you said, more to Jimmy Stewart.
yeah,
But
yeah,
that, my dad would probably be, even though, his heroes were Hollywood heroes anyway, would have been Roy Rogers, Gene Autry, and John Wayne type of character. He was more of a Jimmy Stewart kind of man himself,
okay,
a little more complicated and quiet and about his achievements, but definitely more. There's both a little some. There's definitely a mind there, and a thoughtful person. He was very good at math, for example, and art, but
yeah,
he was definitely a get her done kind of guy as well. My wife's grandfather, very Jimmy Stewartish, even to the point where he became president of a bank.
okay,
So Jimmy Stewart played that role in "It's a Wonderful Life," right?
yeah, yeah,
He was a man who began his life. Not began his life, began his adult career as the owner of a Purina franchise in farm country, which would be a big deal. It's a way to make money if you're an
sure,
agricultural country.
and selling
It's better to
feed,
supply the farmers than to be a farmer in some ways. It's like
yeah,
in a mining camp. You want to be the guy who sells them the shovels
sells
instead
the
of.
shovel, yeah,
So he did really well at that. And when he was so successful that when a local group of business people wanted to start a local bank, they asked him to lead it, to be the president of the bank. And things like that actually happened in those days. This would have been in the 1960s. Yeah, probably the
okay,
60s when
yeah,
this happened.
yeah.
And
Now, were
and when I
the men in your family going back, were they usually college educated, or was that kind of a new later
not
development?
in my family. The
Okay,
most college they got would have been a couple of years in junior college.
okay,
My dad got a semester and then he was drafted. It was so yeah. No, they weren't, and they had come from a lot of. They had started out with very little. They had their parents had nothing to give. Like I said in my video about my dad, was he sent money back home from his military pay when he was in the early 50s just to
Right.
help the family. And I can't remember if his dad died before he got home, just before he got home. The father had recovered and was doing pretty well. He had lost the family fortune over the course of the Great Depression, and spent the next 20 years rebuilding. So by 1955, he had just bought the house that was a really magnificent sort of home up in the foothills of overlooking San Bernardino. If any of that geography means anything to you, I don't. But it's figure 50 miles east of Los Angeles, in the mountains.
Okay.
Anyway, it was a kind of cliffside home, and it was kind of his crowning achievement. Just before he had died, he had managed to make a deal buying this house for his wife because he felt like he needed to make good on restoring her status in life. And but my dad was still sending money home. So I don't know if it was they were cash strapped or it was just all hands on deck. This was what was expected of adult children to help their family, or it could have been just my dad's my dad always felt obligated towards his family to take care of them in one way or shape or another.
And he was one of the older.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he would have been still single. He would have been because his younger brothers, there were still three younger siblings. Their younger brothers would have all been in high school or younger when he was in Korea. So it was probably, and he was unmarried. So his thing probably was that he was just, it was, thinking of him, he had no reason not to. He would have, he just felt obliged to help support the family in whatever small ways he could. And it couldn't have been much because pay was so little
Yeah.
in those days. But now all the older brothers would have been married and trying to struggle and make, and they were by then they weren't really struggling. They were union workers, all of them. So they weren't the intellectual type.
Okay.
By a long shot.
Well, let's kind of shift to, well, there's two different ways to go. One is my other questions had to do with like the Jordan Peterson lower IQ thing, but I kind of want to leave that alone for a little bit and talk about the anti-intellectualism angle. So intellectualism has kind of taken a hit. At least I'll draw a picture and you can help straighten me out or add to it as you see fit. There was we go kind of World War II is kind of the beginning of our conversation anyway. There was a big push for technological advancements then, and then that push extended into things in the 50s and even into the 60s and the space program and stuff like that. And we still have some residuals of that going on with the internet itself. But the faith in intellectualism, as far as like technocratic intellectualism, kind of took a big hit with the atomic age. We just had movies and things about Oppenheimer and kind of this playoff of technological advancement versus moral imperative kind of thing. And then it also took a big hit in the Vietnam era, where there was really a revolt of certain groups of intellectuals against the technocratic part, the government technocratic part, which looking back, seems to be almost kind of two minds, because usually it was the people who wanted more centralized governmental arrangement who didn't like the fruits of the current government arrangement.
Yeah.
But the planning and execution of the Vietnam War, what little I know of it anyway, just doing a little bit of reading, now is looked on as, no, that probably wasn't the way to go. But the whole McNamara and his coming out of the Kennedy administration, what did they call those guys? The kind of a brain trust kind of thing.
Yeah,
the Skunk
they were.
Works.
Yeah, it was. They thought they were the smartest men in the country.
Yeah.
It
And then
was
they put
something
this
he was
together.
very proud of. They were. It was a team of geniuses. They were really.
Yeah. And by the time, within less than a decade, that was like, it was all thumbs down on that. And he went off to do other things, but it was, I don't know, there was kind of a turning against intellectualism at that time. And then now we've kind of taken another hit with COVID against at least government intellectualism and a little bit of anti-expertism, but that was kind of happening already with the financial situation and the Tea Party and some counter to the Obamacare ideas and some things like that. So we have a real strong current of populism or anti-intellectualism, or I don't know how you would want to paint it. And I think we kind of peaked at we reached a climax of our wanting to follow experts some time ago, and then we've kind of been drifting for a while and kind of in a downward direction. So what do you think of my picture, and what would you change or add to that?
It definitely seems to ebb and flow. Where you have this idea where you're going to have it's a modern day equivalent of the Kennedy ideal, the JFK Kennedy, that JFK administration. That would be like they were like a team of Pete Buttigieg's. Why can I say that? Pete Buttigieg. It's hard to do plural for Pete Buttigieg. A team of Mayor Petes and young geniuses. They're super smart, expert, deep knowledge, either in a specialty or a wide variety, but people that you assume know a lot and demonstrate good judgment. And then watching that fail, right? So people place their trust in that, and then it falls apart and visibly and catastrophically, and people lose family or have their lives disrupted. That's good reason to lose their faith in these people, right?
Sure.
Then you get what follows up on the heels of that. Were the Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon administrations, men of dubious character, who inspire conspiratorial fantasies, right?
Yeah.
That you imagine you only see the top 10% of the iceberg, and there's a whole lot of badness going on under the water, out of sight, that only then your imagination runs with.
Right.
And then you get proof of it, right? You find out, oh, well, the whole thing was rotten, right? With the Pentagon report. It was rotten going all the way back to the late Kennedy administration. You find out it was rotten right from the beginning of the Kennedy administration. He's sleeping with a Russian secret agent, and the president is. They're lying to us about his health. They're lying to us about what he knew and didn't know about Cuba and Vietnam, and so on and so forth. Lyndon Johnson's only worse, right? And then Nixon comes along, and it's worse still. We saw that cycle work through in the 60s and
right.
and early 70s.
Trust kind of alternating between a suspicion of nefarious goings on and then a desire to send somebody in to clean it up or even do
Sure, right.
more of
Well,
the
there's you.
same.
Okay, yeah, you keep going. The cycle, it begins with extreme idealism and high levels of trust in expertise and in the potential of an institution being captured by people of these experts that are with a progressive agenda, I suppose you'd say.
Well, either way, yeah, whatever their agenda is, yeah.
Right. And then you get in the 70s Ford and Carter, which were caricatured in the media as well-meaning buffoons ultimately, right? They start out kind of
Yeah.
like they're going to save the day, but Ford is he's stumbling. He starts out with a lot
Yeah.
of good wishes, a lot of support because he's going to clean up the Nixon administration. Then he pardons Nixon, and his popularity crashes. Right? Do
Right.
you remember that?
Yes, I do. Yeah, and they made, you're right that they made, stumbling is the word. They made quite a bit of hay out of physical um, missteps, like
Literally, yeah,
literal missteps.
yeah.
And the guy had been an athlete, so
Right.
it wasn't that
That's
he
right.
was, anyway. But yeah, they made
College
a lot of.
football star or something like that, wasn't
Yeah,
he? Yeah.
they were making a lot of news out of him, tripping when he was walking down the stairs or something like that,
Yeah.
which seems kind of kind of small nowadays.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. Well,
and then
every time the camera's on him 24/7 every time he
that's
goes out,
true. Yeah.
and at that point,
And
and
then Carter also having some similar ups and downs, and
yeah.
some of, I don't remember a lot of Carter's difficulties, except a lot of it was um, economic. And I'm not that up on economics to know exactly what his problem was, but I do know that he was really stuck with it. It was like it was difficult. I felt bad for the guy by the time he was done. What between that and these international problems with the Iran hostage crisis and all of that, and uh, and that kind of started the 24/7 news cycle where
He
for
did.
a year there we had the countdown of hostages in Iran kind of a thing, and that was just kind of by by the time that was done, I thought that was kind of over the top. That was kind of a win of of what's the right word I'm trying to think, the drum beating of media over kind of a common sense we're behind our president, and not and I didn't even think he was particularly a good president, but I don't think he deserved to have one more day in the countdown, where's our hostages kind of thing every night, night after night after night. Anyway.
Yeah, no, you're right. That was the news as entertainment kicked in. So
Right.
CNN, I think, becomes
Yeah,
a reality in 1979. I think that's the year
that
it
might be.
became
Yeah.
a thing. And Nightline, it became a show. That was how it really got started with Ted
Yeah,
Koppel,
that's what it was. Yeah.
and it began as a summary of the news.
Yeah, I think wasn't it a follow on after the evening news and they had
It
Nightline
was. They
afterwards?
exactly. They'd have, and it was competed with Tonight Show,
Yeah.
and it was news as entertainment, and it was about. It started out all about the hostage crisis. So did that. I forgot about the days, the number of days. Well, that was
Yeah.
unusual for Americans. The whole idea that we could be held, our attention could be held hostage in this way was just a shock to our sense of pride and place in the world that I remember.
Yeah, there definitely was an element of this shouldn't be happening. Why aren't they fixing this? Yeah.
Yeah. And we had no idea how weak the military had become after Vietnam. It had they were. We also had no idea that they were busy restructuring it. Uh, so, but that transitional military from the draft fuel to the all volunteer
Right.
military. Took some time, and it took time to rebuild and refit, and funding got stripped from it after Vietnam. Congress, like Congress typically does, overreacted to the last war, and so there was a whole lot happening. Behind the scenes that we were unaware of, and then he tried the rescue mission.
The rescue mission, and there was a tragedy there.
They
I don't remember.
did.
They had a helicopter crash or something,
They
and
did.
they
They
had to call
did.
off the mission.
They tried to fly in they were going to refuel on the ground, so they flew in a tanker into the desert, and were going to refuel the helicopters on the. It was just, and they found that the machinery wasn't up to snuff in desert conditions. So lessons learned would, of course, make them solve problems that would serve us well when George H.W. Bush would send the military in.
That's true.
More than a decade later, but it would be it. It felt terrible. I just remember feeling just disheartened.
Yeah, you grow up on Audie Murphy movies where one guy with a machine gun holds off all the Nazis, and now this it seems like we ought to be able to do this. That was one of the drums that also would get beaten a lot in the 70s. Is like, if we can go to the moon, we should be able to do X. Even if it had nothing to do with going to the moon, that was kind of we should be able to do this. And
Yeah.
it's not that easy. So
No,
yeah.
new problems. Yeah, it's not just the Audie Murphy thing. It's the which Reagan would play off on. He would embody that character as leader, as president.
Yeah.
But it was the idea that this country did D-Day, this phenomenal thing, this historic invasion of France, and we can't handle these. Of course, there were always some sort of racial epithet thrown in with it at the time, but you would say, what are we doing? We can't handle these people. This is crazy. And they're barbaric, and they're cruel, and they're calling us the devil, and then nobody's giving us any. This is where the intellectual shortcomings of the media came into play, and probably still comes into play today. Is they don't give us any context to help us understand the culture that we're reacting to.
That's true.
When we hear them calling us the devil, they hear what they're saying, but are thinking something probably considerably or radically different than what we hear them saying and think about it. To them, what might be a rhetorical flourish is to us an existential threat, and then you respond emotionally to that in ways that
they definitely know that pushes our button. Let's just put it that way.
Whether they knew it or not, it did.
Yeah.
And it was like, why don't we just clobber the hell out of them? And we didn't. And in retrospect, I think it's easier to see now, but at the time, it seemed insane that we were brought to our knees in that way. So that gave us Ronald Reagan. That set the stage, and that cycle began to. It wasn't a return to quite to the same level of the man of intellect, but it was the man of competence, right? It was businessmen come back to the as an ideal, right? They start to the entrepreneur, the individual, kind of comes into his own in our culture, in a new way.
And now, what's it been since 1980? We're now 2020, so that would be 40 years.
Well,
and
see,
we've
1980, right? Think Steve Jobs.
yeah. No, so now we have exercised in a heavy way the private corporate brain trust, and looking at where we're at with private corporate brain trust. Are they any better? And I'm not sure that. I guess the jury might still be out on that, but I'm not sure that.
Well, say it took 20 years to exhaust the Kennedy ideal brain trust, right?
Yeah,
It
yeah,
ran its course.
from
Carter
60 to
and
80.
because
Yeah,
Carter was himself a man, an intellectual. He's a PhD in physics, and Navy guy,
yeah,
but kind of with an engineering background.
yeah. What nuclear engineering?
That's it. Nuclear engineering.
I think
That's
so. Yeah,
it. That's it. And so, but that just burned itself out. And Reagan comes along, something else gets reinvented, but it's kind of a blending, right? Steve Jobs was a good example of the genius,
yeah. Well, there was
entrepreneurial
kind of
man
a
of action, right?
move to privatize things to a certain degree, and of
Sure,
course we
sure.
didn't have that much that was in public holding, but like that Thatcher in the UK did even more of that because the government had more things that they could privatize, but that was kind of a wave in the 80s was to privatize parts that had been um, well publicized. That's not the right word. Had socialized might be a word, but that's kind of fraught with other implications. Things that had been brought under the umbrella of the government then were spun off or turned into contractors or whatever. Um, and
Yeah.
we would look to businessmen or men of business, or instead of Henry Kissinger, let's go Elon Musk or whatever. It was just kind of a outside government will help us. And now we've had 40 years of kind of moving that direction, and I'm not convinced that we've solved the problem, and I'm not really upset about it either. I'm hoping our lesson is that both of them can do well and also can go wrong. But we'll see. I don't know. I'm not sure we learn very well one way or the other. I don't know. What do you think?
But it seems like say the first 20 years, say from 1980 to 2000, you just before it gets lost in kind of history, but because of 9/11.
Yeah.
But at the end of the century, you had the dot-com bust, the first kind of economic collapse of that boom. And it was a bit of an economic shock, but it got drowned out by just the total, complete shock of 9/11. And
There was one success in there when the Berlin Wall fell,
oh, it
and
was
that was
huge.
a big success.
The way
Yeah.
we thought the 1990s, and it made the 1990s a bit frivolous, but we did. We thought we were going to have the peace dividend, and so we elected Carter. I'm not Carter. We elected Clinton,
Yeah.
Bill Clinton, and we thought that was going to be something. But there was really interesting. We're instead of electing the war hero, we elected the draft dodger,
Yeah.
which is really interesting twist of fate. Similarly, pushing the intellectual bent, but now we're full fluff, right? We're not going with the guy who has demonstrated courage in the battlefield. He just demonstrated courage on the college campus and of a different sort. And then, of course, that makes it a questionable courage, right? And then throw in the philandering and
Yeah.
moral
Yeah.
ambiguity.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
And
true.
I'm speaking of it. It sounds like I don't like the guy, and I suppose I really don't. But it's a but I'm a Democrat. I didn't.
Yeah, I
I didn't
understand
vote
what you're
for him.
saying. I look back and I'm usually on the other side of the political aisle, but I actually look back at that period kind of fondly because um, they, well, mostly because the government seemed to be pretty well balanced. There were people on one side, mostly in the legislature, and mostly Republican in the legislature, and mostly Democrat in the White House, of course. And they actually had to negotiate with each other, and they actually were willing to run down the middle. So it was not. It was not. I don't know. You might have a different point of view of that, but
Mm-hmm.
to me, it seemed like we hadn't quite gotten into the run. Everyone run to the far end of the bus, so one guy's run to this end and the other guy's run to. That's not even a good picture. What am I trying to say?
No, I
the
think
way
what
the way
I
we're doing it
recall.
now, where it's like we're polarized to the far end of the room. We don't even talk to each other, and we punish people that talk to the other side. And
Right.
that was not what happened in that era, or at least it doesn't seem like
No,
it to
Newt
me.
Gingrich cleaned Clinton's clock in congressional elections, and Clinton
And they
had to
chased Hillary around because of the,
health care.
yeah. Well, the what was her? Um, she had a gate of her own, and I don't remember what they called it, but it was
Oh,
they had hearings about
oh, that's
their
right. Yeah. It was Whitewater or something like
why,
that, wasn't it?
yeah, and it turned out to be, well, this isn't really very interesting, and they're kind of shady people. But most politicians are kind of shady people. So
Right.
anyway, yeah, but as far as the actual outcome in legislation, it was like, well, this
Yeah,
wasn't
they
so bad.
balanced the budget for the first time because
Yeah, can you
the
believe
Green
it?
that was crazy. No one thought that was going to be possible. The Democrats, for the first time in 40 years, lost the majority in the House, which was a
Yeah,
shock to them, and that brought
yeah,
them to the table. And they negotiated balanced budget out of it
yeah,
for a few years. Then and I think at that point, by the late 90s, it's something we probably should introduce because we're talking about men, and I think it's women enter the culture in a forceful way.
that is an
Um,
interesting point. Yeah, yeah. How much of the change of men's roles has been because of the kind of the success of feminist movement in general? I think some portion of it can be chalked up to that change in expectations because the women have more power.
yeah, they're physically present in leadership more and more and more.
Yeah,
And Hillary took a lot of heat. She was supposed to head off. She was going to lead
you're,
massive
I
healthcare reform
I
and got
remember that. That's right. Yeah,
beat up terribly for it. We would have, I think everybody would have preferred her to have been given the chance to solve it, considering the situation we're in now. But and the kind of half measures of so-called Obamacare,
yeah,
but the idea that this woman was going to force on us socialized medicine was
yeah,
beyond the pale, and we wouldn't even there was that was the kind of the beginning. They would talk to Bill, but they wouldn't talk to Hillary. You could get Congress to negotiate with the president, but they weren't going to negotiate with his wife. And
yeah,
that thing died a quiet death, or not so quiet death. The whole effort.
yeah, yeah.
And did it die? I guess the question would be, did it die because it was led by a woman? The first lady that make it even worse. So somebody who's supposed to be putting out flowers and hosting
Yeah, I
high
don't
school
know.
kids or whatever.
I don't know. Well, I mean, there had been some no, not some precedent for that in like Eleanor Roosevelt. I mean, she did a lot of stuff, and I know they used that precedent at the time. I remember they talked about.
They did.
So yeah, I don't know if it was
Eleanor,
the
though, too, took a lot of heat, and she was bitterly hated by the opposition and by a lot of Americans. Uh, uh, Rumored to be this and that, and what true or not true, I don't know if it really matters. Do we need to? I mean, we excuse me. We should be able to discuss policies and positions without getting into people's personal lives and trying to attack their character. But this is what we do, and we seem to do it more often than women. We did it to Eleanor. We did it to Hillary. We're doing it today. I think that's one of the lines of attack. It seems to be losing its success. I mean, the attempts to attack Kamala Harris politically based on her personal life, like you'll hear people talk, she slept her way to the top or whatever. That just doesn't have quite the same punch.
Yeah, it doesn't have the punch, and I haven't. Well, I'm not attuned for it, but I haven't heard anything that people pointing at her and say she can't do it because she's a woman. I just haven't heard anything that directly confrontational or whatever, misogynistic. I'm sure there's people out there that think that, but I haven't heard any attempt to, what do they call it, dog whistle that or anything. Not like I would pick up on it, so I don't know. But
no,
I just haven't seen that being a wedge. Some of it is because some of the features of the Trump administration were his daughter, and so he's actually broken some of these walls where it probably just wouldn't be that effective anymore.
Well, women at that level or in leadership in general are just ubiquitous.
Yeah, and she was elected vice president, so she has kind of knocked down that wall to a certain degree.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's not the same, and then it says so. But in a way, if we're working in 20-year cycles, which it seems like in the face of it, we kind of are. We're at the end of another 20-year cycle. That if so, from 9/11 to today, we've really stretched it. We're kind of past it, and then the question is, what are we transitioning to now? And maybe this is the source of so much of our anxiety is we don't know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. We have a lot of women governors out there, and a lot of African American governors, and so I think a lot of barriers that were there when you and I started our sojourn on the earth have come down, and that's a good thing. The other, as you were talking about the hostage crisis and other things, I look back and I'm glad that there were people there that did not get overly concerned about losing face, because one of the things I think that has actually worked out better than expected in our lifetimes has been our handling of nuclear arms. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure I'm saying that, nuclear arms. And when we came along, they were like, it's just a matter of somebody's going to lean on the button in the wrong way. Well, now we've found out that people in the Soviet Union saw things on their screens where it was like, they're attacking now. What are we going to do? And they said, that's a shadow. We don't have to worry about it. And they were not quick to push the button, and we're not quick to push the button. And maybe we would rather even not be here if it came to that. Are we going to be here, or are we going to push the button? And that's okay with me. So I'm glad we've avoided being the ones to do that. So,
well, we can certainly do a lot of damage with conventional weapons. And
that's true.
And in some ways, we're learning that conventional weapons are just more useful than nuclear weapons. There's not much you can do with them, right? Once you have them.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not. You lose we're way off our target. But it's okay. Right. It's interesting. It's an interesting thing because it really, they're so much a big hammer that they don't accomplish the goal of the conflict. Unless you're just trying to destroy things, just melt them down, then they won't do what you want to do. So, so the other, let's see, my last one on the list, and I don't know how to do it. Well, I had a kind of an offshoot of the anti-intellectualism, but we probably.
I'm good for another 15, 20 minutes if you are.
Okay. Well, I had another thing in the anti-intellectualism was in a religious context, and that was the rise of fundamentalism. And I think that is also kind of related this little corner type interactions that I've been in. It's been interesting to see. I enjoy Paul talking about the Christian Reformed Church and the ecumenicism of the environment, and I enjoy that. I'm glad that people don't re-argue the conflicts of the last 2100 years or whatever, and we pretty much all get along in that environment. Fundamentalists kind of take it on the nose a little bit, but that's okay. That's kind of where they are. And I kind of count myself in the fundamentalist camp to a certain degree. I'm not a sign waver or protester type fundamentalist, but I'm kind of a simplistic, read what it says kind of fundamentalist. And I feel somewhat vindicated in that, maybe not a lot, and not in a proud way since it wasn't me the whole time, but the erosion of mainline Christianity in the United States, and then at least the more fundamental groups seem to have not eroded quite as badly, and I think they've eroded quite a bit. So that's kind of faint praise, I guess, that they haven't eroded quite as badly. But that might lead us into the other thing. Well, you can comment about that, but that might lead us also into the other thing about how simple Christians might be more effective in some certain way. But
there you go. Yeah, that's probably a more interesting discussion than the fundamentalism, a straight-on, head-on approach to the fundamentalism question would be.
It might be
the nature of simple faith versus intellectual.
Well, I think they're related in a certain degree. I mean, there is the nuanced. You're right, and I agree that there's always more to it than the straightforward. It's got to be this way, or it's got to be that way. But there's also, well, I don't know how to say it. I mean, even if it's going to be useful, it has to mean something. And so if you nuance it enough so that it has no authority anymore, or has no meaning, has no accessible meaning, then it also has no power. And so a certain level of accessibility requires a certain level of definition. And I see this a little bit in Michael's anti-boomer response, in that we kind of wandered into the realm of, I think in the religious sense, I think we spent a time in the realm of, there's so many nuances and it's so complicated that maybe we should just be happy that that we're all standing in the same room. And yeah, there's something to be said about that. But I think then there's more that's apprehendable that could do us some good. But
yeah. No. I think you're getting there. I think it's go back to the widow's mite in Jesus. She's giving her last pennies into the treasury. She's at the temple, and Jesus points out, she gave out of her lack, and while the others who are making a big show of it are giving out of their excess.
Yeah.
And we're, as modern people, all we seem to know, all we seem to value is excess, right? It's
yeah.
which should probably make us all shudder and cover ourselves in sackcloth and ashes and pray. But we only know what we know, and so don't feel too guilty about it. I don't know if that's too useful either. But it is. It's when you see, I've known some really remarkable simple Christians. One lady was a woman who was very close to my wife growing up. And this woman gave and gave and gave of herself right to the end. And had nothing. I mean, she emptied herself. She emptied herself for others outside of her family. She emptied herself for her family. And interestingly enough, one of the jobs how she knew my wife and her sisters was she was the youth group leader for their little Nazarene church in Crawfordsville, and these girls loved her, stayed in touch with her, and when she became very old, one of my wife's sisters, her oldest sister, played a big role in helping to care for her physically as she kind of just went into late stage dementia and became unable to care for herself. She saw a return on her faith in this world, but it's a remarkable kind of faith that no one writes about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Except maybe in novels.
Yeah. You read in the paper every once in a while about someone who, usually a woman, and at least the stereotypical that I see is an African-American woman, and she talks, some criminal person shows up on her doorstep and she talks Jesus to him,
Yeah.
And it's like she gets more done in half an hour than I've probably done in my whole life.
Yeah.
And and
this lady was named Ola May, and she
okay.
just I feel safe naming her, I guess. Remarkable. Probably her name should be known to people.
Probably, yeah.
You just and you hear the Catholics are pretty good at venerating these kinds of saints. They're people who work. The most famous, of course, would be the Albanian nun who worked in India for so long. Suddenly, I'm Mother Teresa.
Mother Teresa. Okay, yeah.
It's that's a person that's a more famous sort of character, but it's humble, simple service. Now it turns out you find out Mother Teresa had doubts towards the end, that you didn't realize that she struggled to with her own faith, had her own faith journey, but
sure.
And so you never know what's going on inside people's heads, but they remain diligent, and I think their sainthood is concretized in their diligence. Does it really matter if they had doubts? It mattered to them personally, and I assume.
Well, John the Baptist had doubts, so it's not.
There you go.
Yeah, and he's the greatest of all the prophets, is what Jesus said. Your quote of Jesus reminded me of another one, and that was the guy in the temple who smote his breast and said, "Be merciful to me, a sinner." And I think Jesus said he went up justified, or went down justified, maybe whatever. He left the temple justified.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I'm glad that people are looking. And not only that, I encourage people to communicate, We need
to start in the corner, I think, because we are so heady. We probably should spend more time contemplating the poverty of our own spirits, in the sense that our own spiritual condition, because we do need to. We do this need to think and talk through everything is symptomatic of a need that we don't realize. We think we need one thing when in fact we probably need something else altogether.
What do you think that other thing would be?
It's more like that simple, to have that simple faith. I mean, you can't make yourself believe. This is the problem: is you just once you go ahead, you're going to say something. It's probably
Well, I
better.
was going to say, is that the Grim Grizz thing? What is his word? It's it starts with an L and it's an acronym, and now I can't remember what it is.
Oh,
Live
LARP, the
LARP.
LARPing.
Is
Yeah,
that the LARPing? And I think maybe it might be where you actually stick your toe in the water and say, I'm going to try this and see what happens. And that one thing I encourage people to do, which I don't very much because I don't get a lot of opportunity to do it, is if you're in distress, cry out, just say what your problem is. And maybe you think, oh, there's nobody there to hear me. And that might be true, but people send letters to Santa Claus, and they'll, there's a childlikeness there that maybe would do you some good. And so write a
yeah,
letter, say it out loud, either whatever, if you're out there, I could use some help, and stick your toe in the water, and then if you want to take kind of if you want to take the personal action kind of thing besides that, start helping people. That's kind of the Jordan Peterson psychology of it, is that your life will be improved if you help people and start helping people. And that, in my experience, that's been true, that if you start helping people. Now, one of the things that happens if you start helping people is they'll start wanting your help because everybody can use some help. So then you'll get into things like prioritizing and figuring out, why am I actually here and who should I be helping, and the interesting questions like that. So if nothing else, it will take your mind off of, should I live or not live? It's more like, yeah, who am I going to help, and who should, who can I not help or won't help so much, or whatever. You start prioritizing where you're going to put your efforts. So if nothing
sure.
else, it will distract you from whatever basement your mind has been dwelling in. So
Yeah, well, I think Peterson, the emphasis on status seems to undermine the position, like you said, that says more that is, excuse me, it he values status so much that it undermines the idea that I think for a lot of us that a simple life of faith is enough.
yeah, well, and he hasn't chosen that for himself. So I understand what you're saying. He's still kind of
Chasing the
standing on the
monkey.
outside and then holding us up to the light. How do we actually work, and how does this work? Um, and so we'll see. I don't think he completely. He doesn't. I give. In fairness, I would say that he doesn't completely hold himself off from that, because when he talks about having studied evil and the concentration camp guards and imagining himself as being able to, do these evil
Sure.
things, and I think that's he's putting himself under his same examination, and I think that's useful. But he doesn't do that. At least I don't know. I don't watch all this stuff, but I don't see him doing that an awful lot.
He's a complicated person.
He is, yeah, and he's
And
really smart, and so he's way ahead of
you know,
me. So
yeah, there is he's resistant to criticism, but at the same time he's self-critical. So he's willing. It's two sides, but he's been beat up a lot in the media
that's
and
true.
whatnot. So
Yeah,
it makes
that's
a
true.
person a bit punch drunk, probably
Yeah,
after a
and he has a
while.
lot of people watching everything he does too, which I'm not sure that's good for a person for
No, it's
an
not. It
extended
can't
amount of
be.
time.
It
Yeah.
can't be healthy, right? It's hard. It's hard to endure, and so just now, Russell Brand is getting a lot of attention, and he's converted, and he's certainly a flamboyant convert. The man's potential for I don't know. It could I don't. It will be fascinating to watch to see what comes out of that life now.
Yeah.
Uh, and
Yeah. I
it's
don't know.
the nature of the times, right? It's almost we went from if you went from the Jimmy Stewart ideal as a kind
To
of
Russell Brand.
to Russell Brand. It's quite a transition.
It is. Yeah, it is.
I
With
wouldn't.
the
Would you
Jimmy Stewart,
trust?
there's kind of a cultural Christianity expected. And with Russell Brand, it's kind of like he takes on Christianity and everybody's kind of surprised. And so it's been a long trip. And I don't know what's going to happen next, but it's interesting.
Well, the foxhole test, right? Would
Yeah.
you, men actually followed Jimmy Stewart into hell in World War II under
Yeah.
his leadership, flying
B-17.
bombers.
Yeah. I don't know
Yeah.
what he flew. It was bombers. Yeah.
Oh yeah, they were bombers and squadrons of them. And would you follow Peterson or Brand similarly? Peterson, I still don't know if I'd follow Peterson in the battle, but more Clyde. If I had to choose a leader, certainly it'd be Peterson over Brand. But it would be, I would be like, can we find somebody else? Sarge,
Well,
do we have somebody else we can follow up this hill?
well, I have one last direction I want to take it, but this is kind of the old folks direction. One of the reasons I'm interested in lower IQ role is both my grandmothers and my father have gone into the kind of dementia state as they've aged. So I'm 60, I'll be 63 here pretty soon. And I'm not sure how much of me is going to be left when I get to 83, and probably nothing at all at 93. So over the next 20 years, I got to figure out, I think I'm smart, or I think I'm capable, or I think I can, do this and do that. And my abilities to do things are going to be whittled away till I'm, my structure is disappearing. So I'm watching for things, ways that I can be useful. I can have a prayer list. I can, I don't know, be encouraging. That's always a good thing, but we'll see. So,
well, I didn't know that was the case for you. I'm sorry. I'm
no,
living
that's
through the same
okay.
thing too. So
Yeah,
we're in the same boat. I've wondered that too. I've tried to figure out how much time I really have. Part of me feels like I'm down to my last 10 years. Actuarially, as the insurance guys say, I may have more
yeah.
life in me, but I don't know of really good years. I would say I would think that with,
I think if you're above 60, around 60 now, you're probably actuarially headed for about early 80s, 83,
yeah,
85, something like that. It's what they say, and that's
right.
average.
Well, and
Yeah,
you're a
I'm
runner, so you're an athlete. That helps. You
yeah,
have,
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's good to not have health trouble, but you can only dodge it for so long, and then
yeah.
you'll need someone to hold the spoon to feed you, and hopefully there'll be someone around willing to do it. If you have to pay somebody to do it, that's okay, but it's nicer if they have some investment in your survival more than just, they kept a light lid on the board
Oh
in the nursing
yeah, it's
station.
you definitely need at the very least advocates that care for you, even if you are in an institution. That
Yeah,
you need people who are fighting for you every day to make sure that you're comfortable
we're
and
on the
are being
tail
cared
end of
for.
the baby boomers, which means there's going to be a lot of people older than us, and I'm thinking we'll probably get some good, not only lessons of what works and what doesn't, but probably opportunities to participate, probably more than we want. So
Definitely. Well,
I
on
think
that cheery note, do you want to close it?
yeah, I think I'm done. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you. This has been a good, very corner-esque kind of discussion where we've been all over the place, but you gave us a good structure to work from, and we got some ideas out there, and it's certainly going to, not without some controversy, I'm guessing, because we're touching on that generational question that seems to
Yeah,
get folks worked up. But
if they can swim through the first hour, then they might find something worthwhile at the end there.
there you go. Thank you very much, Chris. Chris Howard, how can people find you? Or do you have your own channel? Do you produce any content? Or are
I have
you?
I do have my own channel. I have not I have a couple of videos out there. I haven't really produced anything, and I've been thinking about doing something, but I'm not sure what my niche should be. One thing that I did think of that really hasn't been serviced is the comments. You know, it'd be really interesting you see some comment that's unusual, to track that person down and say, you know, what did you mean about that? Or get the two people that were back and forthing about it and say, okay, guys, go at it. And I don't know if I have the ambition or the power to do that.
That's not a bad idea. And I would like to do this radio format. Ideally, I'd like to get up to like 3 times a week.
Okay.
So I'll need some help getting content out. And so if ever you wanted to try something like that here first or just do it here, whatever, but we could try it. I'm willing to experiment, and you're welcome to participate if you didn't want to hassle with your own thing and pay for your own StreamYard subscription and all that. We could just use my platform because, like I said, I'll need content. I think we can. People seem to really like the audio only thing. It's kind of helpful to kind of you know how when you have a video and you're listening to it in the background, but at the same time you have a bit of FOMO going on. I'm missing something on the screen, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
By stripping that out, it's all audio.
Well,
you don't have to worry
listen
about
while
it.
You're driving or you're exercising or something else. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it focuses the mind just on the conversation. So it seems to be working. So if you want to participate in that, it's a great idea. Go, because there are some good comments.
You need to get like some puppy videos or something with your bird feeder. So you could, have the birds, watching the birds while you're listening to people talk. I just say that I like the format. Nothing wrong with what you're doing, but it seems kind of wasteful to have a video with no video.
A video with no video. Yeah. It's really made for it's true wildlife video or something like that.
There you go. Yeah. You buy yourself a parakeet and put a camera on him while we talk. Yeah. Something like that. Anyway, thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, Chris. You have a good day. Okay.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.